The swing set stood in the backyard of a modest beige house on Sycamore Creek Road, just outside of Ionia, Michigan, and on the afternoon of September 14, 2009, the chain still moved just barely, the way chains do when a child has only recently stepped away. The seat was still warm, the grass beneath it still pressed flat. A pink sneaker, size 5, lay on its side in the dirt beside the sandbox, its Velcro tab still fastened, as though it had simply slipped off a small foot mid-play. Ava Collins was 3 years old. She had brown eyes the color of river mud in autumn, a gap between her 2 front teeth she had only just grown in, and a laugh that her mother, Renee Collins, once described to a neighbor as sounding like someone had taught a songbird to giggle. She liked purple. She liked her stuffed rabbit named Mr. Ears. She liked sitting in the passenger seat of her father's truck and pretending to steer when the vehicle was parked in the driveway. On the afternoon of September 14, 2009, in a rural stretch of Ionia County, Michigan, where the trees stand close and the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away, Ava Collins was playing in the backyard. And then she was not. In the years that would follow, 2 questions would haunt this case above all others. Not where did Ava go, but rather, who, among the people who said they loved her, knew the answer all along? Ionia County sits in the heart of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, a place of rolling agricultural land, white pine corridors, and small towns connected by 2-lane roads that narrow between harvested cornfields in the fall. September in that part of the state carries the particular quality of a season in transition. The mornings are cold enough for a light jacket, the afternoons warm enough to forget you needed one, the air thick with the smell of turned earth and the first decay of fallen leaves. The Collins family had lived at 4417 Sycamore Creek Road for just under 2 years. It was a rental, a single-story, 3-bedroom house with aluminum siding, a detached garage, and a backyard that butted against a thin tree line separating the property from a drainage ditch that ran west toward a small, unnamed pond roughly 400 yards from the rear fence. The property was not fenced entirely. The eastern edge, where the backyard met the side yard, was open. Renee Collins was 31 years old in September of 2009. She worked part-time as a cashier at a farm supply store in Portland, Michigan, approximately 11 miles from their home. She was, by all accounts, a devoted and attentive mother. She coached Ava through the words to "You Are My Sunshine" on the back porch during summer evenings. She kept a small notebook in the kitchen junk drawer where she recorded Ava's new words, first phrases, small milestones. The last entry in that notebook, written 2 days before Ava disappeared, read, "Said I love you, Mama," without prompting. September 12, 7:14 p.m. Ava's father, Derek Collins, was 34. He worked for a fencing contractor out of Grand Rapids, a job that required him to leave the house before 6 in the morning on most days and return by mid-afternoon when the season's light permitted. He was a quiet man, thick through the shoulders, economical with words, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked and forgot birthdays without meaning to. He coached a youth soccer team on Saturday mornings. He had no criminal history. On the morning of September 14, 2009, Renee later told investigators the day had begun as most days did. She woke at 6:15. Derek had already left for a job site in Saranac. She fed Ava a breakfast of scrambled eggs and apple slices at 7, dressed her in a pair of denim overalls and a purple long-sleeve shirt, and let her watch 30 minutes of a children's program while Renee showered and cleaned the kitchen. The weather that morning was partly cloudy, with temperatures in the low 60s. By noon, the sky had broken open into pale, clean autumn sunlight. At approximately 1:45 in the afternoon, Renee brought Ava outside to the backyard. She set up the sandbox and brought out 3 of Ava's toy trucks, a red one, a yellow one and a blue one with a broken front axle that Ava refused to discard because it was her favorite. She brought out Mr. Ears. She pushed Ava on the swing for several minutes, listening to the child laugh. Then Renee's phone rang. It was her mother calling from Greenville, 40 minutes north. Her father had fallen. Not badly, she was told, but badly enough. Renee stepped inside, she said, just through the sliding glass door into the kitchen to take the call, where she could still see the swing set through the glass. The call lasted 11 minutes. Investigators later pulled the phone records and confirmed this. 11 minutes and 22 seconds, beginning at 1:52 p.m. When Renee stepped back outside at 2:04 p.m., the swing was moving. The seat was empty. The yellow toy truck was on its side in the sandbox. The red one lay near the fence post. The blue one with the broken axle was gone. Mr. Ears was still there. Renee called out. She checked the side yard, the front yard, the garage. She called out again. She walked the perimeter of the property. She walked it again. She went inside and checked every room, checked under beds, checked closets, checked the bathroom. At 2:19 p.m., Renee Collins called 911. "I can't find my daughter," she told the dispatcher. Her voice, preserved in the call recording, was tight and high, the specific pitch of a person trying very hard to stay calm because calm felt like the only thing still within their control. She was just outside. She was just here. She's 3 years old. Her name is Ava. The Ionia County Sheriff's Department received the call at 2:19 p.m. and dispatched the first unit at 2:21 p.m. The first deputy arrived at 4417 Sycamore Creek Road at 2:34 p.m., 13 minutes after the call. 13 minutes in a case like this is both very fast and a very long time. Derek Collins was notified by phone at approximately 2:25 p.m. while still on the job site in Saranac. He left immediately. He arrived home at 2:58 p.m., 54 minutes after his daughter was last seen. He was documented as pale, shaking, his jaw set hard in the way of a man fighting something internal and losing. He embraced Renee in the driveway. He asked the deputies quietly, "Did you check the pond?" No one had yet. The pond, 400 yards west through the tree line, had not yet been included in the search perimeter. It was a detail that would matter later. By 4:00 p.m. on September 14, 2009, the Ionia County Sheriff's Department had established an incident command post at the end of the driveway at 4417 Sycamore Creek Road. 2 additional units had been dispatched. Michigan State Police had been notified. The Ionia County Search and Rescue Team, 16 trained volunteers, had been activated. The search was divided into sectors. Sector 1 covered the immediate yard and outbuildings. Sector 2 encompassed the tree line and drainage corridor. Sector 3 extended to the unnamed pond and the agricultural fields beyond it. K-9 units were requested from the Kent County Sheriff's Department and were en route. The light was already beginning to shift by the time the K-9 team arrived. By 5:30 p.m., dusk was coming in from the east like a slow gray tide, and the temperature had dropped sharply from 58 degrees at noon to 42 by 6 o'clock. A missing 3-year-old, September, Michigan. Every deputy on scene understood what that combination meant. By nightfall, more than 40 searchers moved through the woods behind the property with flashlights and thermal imaging equipment borrowed from the state police. The K-9 unit picked up a scent trail from the backyard that led in the direction of the tree line approximately 60 feet, and then stopped. Simply stopped in the middle of the corridor, where the undergrowth was dense and the ground soft with recent rain. The handler noted it in her report. Track terminated without apparent reason. No natural barrier. No water crossing. Loss of scent consistent with subject being carried or transported by vehicle. That line, carried or transported by vehicle, would sit in a case file for years before anyone examined what it truly meant. By the following morning, September 15th, the search had expanded to include volunteer groups from Ionia, Portland, and Belding. A tip line had been established. Flyers were printed and distributed across Ionia County. The Amber Alert system was activated at 7:42 a.m., broadcasting Ava's description: 3 years old, brown eyes, brown hair, last seen in purple long-sleeve shirt and denim overalls, height approximately 3 feet, weight approximately 32 pounds across the state. The community response was immediate and genuine. By 10 o'clock on the morning of the 15th, more than 200 volunteers had gathered at the Ionia County Fairgrounds, which had been designated as the secondary command post. They came in work boots and hunting jackets, carrying their own flashlights and walking sticks. They came in silence mostly, the way rural Midwesterners gather at the edge of something serious. Television crews from Grand Rapids arrived. A reporter from Wood TV stood at the end of Sycamore Creek Road and broadcast that evening's 6 o'clock news in front of the Collins driveway, the yellow crime scene tape behind her trembling in the wind. And through all of it, the search teams found nothing. No clothing, no further footprints, no sign of Ava Collins anywhere in a steadily widening radius that, by the third day, extended more than 2 miles from the home. On the second day, investigators conducted the first of several formal interviews with both Derek and Renee Collins. These were standard procedure, investigators said. The parents of missing children are always interviewed. This is protocol, not accusation. But protocols, applied carefully, reveal things. Renee Collins was cooperative and forthcoming, detail-oriented in the way of a person reliving a memory they can't stop reliving. She wept openly during portions of the interview. She asked, repeatedly, whether searchers had checked the ditch where the water runs. She mentioned it 4 times. Investigators noted this. Derek Collins was calm. Composed in a way that gave investigators pause, not the composure of a man who had compartmentalized his grief, but the composure of a man who appeared, in the words of one investigator's notes, almost managed, as though staying within a script he had rehearsed. Those who knew him said Derek Collins had always been that way, measured, self-controlled, not given to displays of emotion. His foreman said as much to deputies who canvassed the job site. Derek doesn't react, he processes, that's just how he is. His brother Michael Collins said the same. He's not a crier, he never has been, it doesn't mean anything. But deputies whispered quietly among themselves about something that had emerged from the initial interviews, a discrepancy in Derek's account of his whereabouts. Derek told investigators he had left the job site in Saranac at approximately 2:30 p.m. after receiving Renee's call. He said the drive had taken him approximately 25 minutes. He arrived at the house at 2:58 p.m., consistent with arrival times noted by deputies on scene. But the foreman's log at the Saranac job site showed Derek Collins had clocked out at 1:48 p.m., more than 40 minutes before he claimed to have received the call. The job site was 22 miles from the Collins home. At legal driving speeds, the journey should have taken roughly 30 minutes. 1 hour and 10 minutes was unaccounted for. Investigators noted this discrepancy. They noted it, filed it, and continued searching for a 3-year-old girl who had been gone, by now, for 4 days. The odometer of Derek's work truck, a 2007 Ford F-250, white, was photographed and logged. Investigators requested maintenance records to establish a baseline reading, but the request was processed slowly. The way requests sometimes are when a department is managing a large active search, and a case is still theoretically a missing persons matter rather than something else. On day 5, the pond 400 yards west of the home was fully drained by a team from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. They found an old tire rim, a bicycle frame, and a large quantity of waterlogged debris. They did not find Ava Collins. By day 10, the case was not yet cold, but it was cooling. The volunteer numbers had diminished. The news trucks had moved on to other stories. The tip line still received calls, but fewer of them, and none of them solid. Investigators had no body. They had no physical evidence of harm. They had a child who had vanished, a scent trail that ended in the middle of a wooded corridor, and a gap in a father's timeline that no one had yet confronted him directly about. The case entered a formal holding pattern in November 2009. Ava Collins remained classified as an endangered missing person. The file was placed in a cabinet. The cabinet was in a room that investigators passed every day on their way to other things. By the spring of 2010, Derek and Renee Collins had separated. This was not surprising in the abstract. The loss of a child, even the unresolved, agonizing loss of a child whose fate remains unknown, tears through marriages like water through limestone. Quietly, over time, finding the fault lines that were always there and widening them until the structure can no longer hold. Grief shared is not necessarily grief that binds. But those who knew the family in those months said it was something other than shared grief that came between Derek and Renee. It was, by multiple accounts, the silence. Not the silence of a house without a child's noise, though that silence was there too, crushing and specific, the kind that fills the corners of rooms where toys no longer live. The silence they described was something else. The particular silence that settles between two people when one of them knows something the other is beginning to suspect, and both of them are waiting to see who will speak first. Renee's sister, Carol Beaumont, who had moved into the house on Sycamore Creek Road in October 2009 to help Renee through the initial months, gave an account to an Ionia County investigator in March of 2010 that was, she said, the hardest thing she had ever described out loud. There were nights when Renee would wake up screaming, Carol said. And Derek would come in, he'd be standing there in the doorway, and he just wouldn't go to her. He'd stand there and watch. And after a while he'd go back to bed. She paused in the account, according to the interview transcript. It wasn't grief. It didn't look like grief. It looked like someone watching something they were waiting to be over. Renee moved back to Greenville in April 2010 to be near her parents. She took almost nothing from the house: clothes, her grandmother's quilt, the small notebook from the kitchen junk drawer. Derek moved to Grand Rapids that summer. He got an apartment on the west side of the city. He went back to work. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, not an abstract suspicion, but a specific, corrosive doubt that lives in your chest and changes the way you breathe when they're in the room. The following years in the Collins case require no dramatic narration. They require only honesty about how long people can carry impossible knowledge before it surfaces. Renee Collins carried it for 2 years. She told her therapist first. She told the therapist that she had found, in early October 2009, 3 weeks after Ava's disappearance, a receipt in the center console of Derek's work truck. She had been cleaning it out, preparing to return the vehicle to the rental company. The receipt was from a hardware store in Portland, Michigan, a store 11 miles west of their home and 7 miles north of the Saranac job site. The receipt was time-stamped too, 7 p.m. on September 14, 2009. 3 minutes after Renee had last seen Ava alive, Derek Collins had been purchasing something in a town that was 17 minutes away from their home. The items on the receipt: 2 rolls of heavy-gauge plastic sheeting, a box of contractor trash bags, a folding utility shovel. Renee Collins had put the receipt in her coat pocket. She had carried it through the remaining weeks of the search. She had carried it through the winter. She had folded it and refolded it until the paper was soft as cloth along the creases. She had told herself there was an explanation. She had told herself she did not want to know the explanation. She had told herself that telling someone would make the explanation real, and that as long as it remained unspoken, Ava was still just missing. In April 2011, 19 months after Ava's disappearance, Renee Collins called the Ionia County Sheriff's Department and asked to speak with the investigator assigned to her daughter's case. She brought the receipt. The investigator noted it was still folded along 4 soft creases, as though it had been handled many times, as though someone had opened it and closed it over and over in the dark of a coat pocket, trying to decide. The investigator did not comment on this in the report, but the receipt, and the timestamp, and the 17-mile distance, and the items purchased, these things were documented, photographed, and submitted to the case file alongside a renewed request for the odometer records from Derek Collins' work truck. Those records, when finally compiled and cross-referenced, showed the truck had traveled approximately 41 miles on September 14, 2009, 9 miles more than the round trip between the Saranac job site and the family home would have required. 9 miles. On a rural road, 9 miles can reach a great many places, a great many fields, a great many drainage ditches, a great many tree lines at the edge of land that no one watches and no one walks and no one searches unless they are told precisely where to look. The case was reopened in May 2011. It was now classified as a homicide investigation. Ava Collins had been missing for 20 months. A small stuffed rabbit named Mr. Ears still sat in an evidence bag on a shelf in the Ionia County Sheriff's evidence room. It had been found in the backyard on the afternoon of September 14, 2009, right where Ava had left it. Renee had asked in the early days whether she could have it back. She had been told, not yet. Not yet had become 20 months. The case formally reopened on May 9, 2011, under lead investigator Detective Sergeant Patricia Holloway of the Michigan State Police, Post D, Grand Rapids. Holloway had 22 years in the department, the last 8 in major crimes. She had 3 children of her own. She did not, those who worked with her would later say, keep her professional detachment about this case. She wore it differently than most. The first thing Holloway did was drive the 9-mile differential herself. She drove it slowly, on a Tuesday morning in May with the windows down, using the odometer and the center console records to reconstruct the most likely routes Derek Collins could have taken on September 14, 2009, if he had deviated from the direct path between Saranac and home. There were 3 plausible routes. One ran north along County Road 616, past a series of private agricultural parcels and a decommissioned gravel quarry. The second cut southwest toward the Grand River floodplain. The third, and this was the one that made Holloway pull over and sit for a moment with her hands still on the wheel, ran west and then south along a 2-track access road that cut through a stretch of DNR-managed wetland forest bordering the southern edge of Ionia County. It was remote, dense hardwood and red pine, the undergrowth heavy with cedar and tag alder, the ground wet year-round from subsurface drainage, the kind of place hunters used in November and nobody else used at all. Holloway requested a cadaver K-9 search of the wetland corridor on May 17, 2011. The MSB coordinated with Ionia County. A team of 4 handlers and their dogs entered the corridor at first light. At 9:47 a.m. on May 17, 2011, a cadaver dog named Rector, working with handler Corporal James Dunn, alerted at the base of a large fallen red pine approximately 300 yards into the wetland corridor, in a section of ground that showed evidence of disturbance. A slight depression in the earth, inconsistent with the surrounding terrain, edged with a line of compressed moss that had regrown uniformly, suggesting the ground had been disturbed some time ago and had since been colonized. Corporal Dunn's radio transmission at 9:49 a.m. was recorded by dispatch. Rector has a hit at the Pine Fall, grid reference November 7. I need a forensic team out here. Clears throat. The excavation took most of the day. Forensic anthropologists from Michigan State University were on scene by noon. The ground was carefully removed in layers, documented with photographs and measurements at each stage. The soil sifted through mesh screens into clean containers. At 3:14 p.m., the remains of a small child were recovered. The remains were later confirmed, through dental records and mitochondrial DNA comparison with Renee Collins, to be those of Ava Marie Collins, age 3. She had been approximately 2 feet below the surface, wrapped in heavy-gauge plastic sheeting consistent with the type sold at hardware stores in late 2009. A folding utility shovel, its manufacturer's serial number partially legible, was found at the base of the excavation. The cause of her passing was determined through forensic pathology to have been consistent with asphyxiation. The medical examiner's report, released in July 2011, noted that the physical evidence was consistent with accidental suffocation followed by deliberate concealment, though the precise sequence and circumstances remained, and still remain, a matter of legal record rather than public documentation. Derek Collins was arrested on June 2, 2011 at his apartment in Grand Rapids. He was taken into custody at 6:47 in the morning by Detective Sergeant Holloway and 2 Grand Rapids PD officers. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and standing in the kitchen when they entered. He had a cup of coffee in his hand. He set it down on the counter, very carefully, and said nothing. He did not, those present noted, appear surprised. He was transported to the Ionia County Jail. He was charged with second-degree homicide, concealment of a deceased person, and providing false statements to law enforcement officers in connection with an active investigation. His bail was set and denied. The arrest drew immediate and substantial media coverage. Wood TV, WZZM, and WLNS all ran the story within the hour. By midday, it was on the AP wire and had been picked up by national outlets. The photograph that ran with most of the stories was Derek Collins' driver's license image, blank-faced, slightly squinting, unremarkable in every way. The public reaction split along lines that are, by now, familiar to anyone who has watched such cases unfold. Those who said they always knew, and those who said they never would have believed it. Those who knew Derek Collins well, his brother Michael, his foreman, his Saturday morning soccer team parents, were stunned. He coached those kids every single week for 3 seasons, one parent, a woman named Darlene Presco, told a Grand Rapids news station. He was good with them. He was patient. I just cannot square those 2 things. She shook her head on camera. She didn't say anything else. Renee Collins did not give media interviews. Her sister Carol issued a brief written statement on her behalf. Renee asks only that Ava be remembered as she was happy, loved, and full of life. She asks for privacy as she tries to understand things that may never fully be understandable. The trial of Derek Collins began in March 2012 in Ionia County Circuit Court. The prosecution's case rested on four pillars: the timeline discrepancy, the hardware store receipt, the odometer records, and the physical evidence recovered from the wetland corridor. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the hardware purchases were for a legitimate work project, that the odometer discrepancy could be explained by an undocumented personal errand, and that no direct witness placed Derek Collins at the scene. The jury deliberated for 2 days and 9 hours. On March 29, 2012, Derek Collins was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He said nothing when the verdict was read. He had said very little throughout the trial. His attorney spoke for him as attorneys do. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Derek Collins stood, looked briefly at the gallery and said simply, "No." Renee Collins was present in the courtroom. She sat in the second row behind the prosecution table. She wore a dark blue blouse. She held the small notebook from the kitchen junk drawer, the one with Ava's milestones written in her own handwriting. She held it in both hands throughout the reading of the verdict, and those who sat near her said she did not cry. She just looked forward, very steadily, as though she had been preparing for exactly this moment for a long time and intended to be fully present for it. After the sentencing, she walked out of the courthouse into a March afternoon that was bright and very cold. A reporter approached her at the bottom of the steps. She stopped, looked at him, and then continued walking. The notebook was still in her hands. Ava Collins was 3 years old when she went missing from a backyard in Ionia County, Michigan, on a September afternoon when the leaves were just beginning to turn. She had brown eyes and a gap between her front teeth and a laugh her mother said sounded like a songbird had learned to giggle. She liked purple. She liked a toy truck with a broken axle that she refused to discard. She called her stuffed rabbit Mr. Ears. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to learn to read. She deserved to be embarrassed by her parents in high school and fall in love and argue about something small and eat her grandmother's cooking and have a Tuesday that meant nothing except that she was alive to have it. Cases like Ava's ask a question that the law cannot fully answer and grief cannot fully contain. How long can the truth remain buried before the ground gives it back? In Ava's case, the answer was 20 months, 3 weeks and 4 days. That is both too long and, in the history of cases like hers, not as long as it could have been. There are families for whom the answer has been decades. There are families for whom the answer has not yet come. The evidence bag with Mr. Ears in it was returned to Renee Collins in the summer of 2012, after the conclusion of the trial. She drove to the sheriff's department on a July morning to collect it. She was in and out in less than 10 minutes. She did not tell anyone what she did with the rabbit afterward. That part is hers. Clears throat. Justice in a case like this is a word that lands differently depending on where you stand. For the courts, it meant a verdict and a sentence. For the investigators, it meant a file moved from one cabinet to another, from open to closed, from cold to resolved. For Renee Collins, it meant something no courtroom could have named precisely, something quieter and smaller and more permanent than any of those things. It meant that her daughter, who had been buried in a cold wetland under a fallen tree for nearly 2 years, had been found. She had been found. And the world knew her name. Ava Marie Collins, 3 years old, September 14, 2009, remembered. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share this episode. Pass it forward. Because somewhere out there right now, there is another case file sitting in another cabinet, in another sheriff's department in another quiet county. And somewhere out there, someone is carrying a folded receipt in their coat pocket and trying to decide. Someone is still waiting to be heard. Help them be heard. Subscribe, share, don't let the silence win.